Welcome to part 2 of the latest podcast from the Gold Chronicles with Jim Rickards and Alex Stanczyk, presented by Physical Gold Fund.
Jim, talk a little bit about like how SWIFT works and how anything that's done really in U.S. dollars. I mean, how that happens and how regulators can use that.
Sure. So let's say I'm Deutsche Bank, and I'm the biggest bank in Germany, and a lot of my business is in euros, but I deal in all the major currencies. And you're Citibank, and you're sitting in New York, and same thing. You're one of the biggest banks in the United States, and I've got to send you $2 billion because whatever. I mean, my dealers bought foreign exchange from your dealers, or we had a bunch of transactions, or customers want to move money, whatever it is. I want to send you $2 billion. How do I actually do that? Well, one thing you don't do is like go to the ATM, get a bunch of cash, put it in FedEx, and send it. That's obviously ridiculous, but we can cross that off the list. Well, I could send you some kind of commercial paper, negotiable instrument by courier, but that's slow and pokey. And it wasn't that long ago that that's the way things were done. The way they do it now is they send a message through SWIFT, Society for Worldwide Financial Telecommunications. And SWIFT is not, they don't consider themselves a payment system. They're certainly not a bank or a financial institution. They kind of compare themselves to the phone company. They say, look, what we do is we handle message traffic. And hey, but to get in SWIFT, you have to agree to obviously abide by all the protocols of SWIFT. So I'm Deutsche Bank, and I want to send Citibank $2 billion. The way we actually do this today, or the way they actually do it, is they send a message through the SWIFT system. So SWIFT is, like I say, it's like I think of it as a giant digital switchboard. And they have forms that they use. They can all be done online. They go by the name MT, which stands for message traffic. There's an MT 101, MT 102, 202, et cetera, lots of different kinds. But here's the thing about SWIFT. Assuming I'm an authorized participant, and you're an authorized participant, and we both have the right protocols and the passwords, and we go on and we fill out this MT form, and somebody hits send. So I'm Deutsche Bank, and I just sent you $2 billion. That's irrevocable. I can't say, whoops, sorry, I pushed the wrong button, or, oh, gee, I filled out the form. Too bad. That's on me now. Now, if I actually do that, mistakes do happen. The bank has to go call the other bank, explain what happened. Maybe they can sort it out. Maybe they can't. Maybe there's a lawsuit. Who knows? But SWIFT says we have nothing to do with that. We're not your referee. We're not your escrow agent. We're just the phone company. We connect the switchboard and the message goes through. So that's the way things are done today. It's pretty efficient. Certainly a lot better than the way it used to be. But it still, takes a lot to, maintain SWIFT. And SWIFT is subject to government intervention and government control. Now, it's rare. They don't like it. They like to keep out of politics. Obviously, there could be all kinds of squabbles among all the SWIFT members. They don't like to get in the middle of that. But there have been several instances, the most famous of which in 2012, I believe, 2012, 2013, right in there, Iran was kicked out of the SWIFT system. That is, the Board of Governors, or the Supervisory Board of SWIFT, said that Iran could not use the system. That was part of U.S. sanctions on Iran because of the Iranian nuclear weapons and uranium enrichment programs. SWIFT didn't really want to do it, but there was pressure put on them for that reason. That was a big deal because Iran could, ship oil, which they do, but they could not get paid in dollars or euros or any other, hard currency through the SWIFT system, and they had no other way of doing it. Now you could get, Indian rupees deposited in your account in an Indian bank if you wanted rupees, but not kind of limited in terms of what you could actually do with that. But you couldn't transact in dollars or euros or anything else anybody really wanted. And Iran did workarounds. They did barter. Gold was a big part of it because, of course, they could just put a bunch of gold on a plane and fly it to somebody and unload it, and there's your payment, and there's nothing digital about it, no way to interdict it other than shooting the plane down. But even then, the gold would just land on the ground. That's the great thing about gold; it's pretty much indestructible. But the point being, that was a real burden on Iran. It brought them to the negotiating table and led to this agreement under the Obama administration. I don't want to do a deep dive on the agreement, but those financial sanctions were very effective. Today, North Korea is the one that's kicked out. But it is rare. They don't like to do it, and they like to keep it out of politics. But what the blockchain offers, and particularly this Ethereum application or applications created on the Ethereum platform, allow for the kinds of transfers I'm describing with no trusted counterparties, no kind of heavy infrastructure. And a lot of people are looking at this, Alex. I mean, J.P. Morgan's working on it. Blythe Masters, formerly head of commodities trading, is in a joint venture or in an enterprise with some other founders are looking at it. Mark Andreessen, the Winklevoss twins, other major banks. The IMF is looking at it. Russia's looking at it. So, but again, there's good reason to be enthusiastic about the technology. And, I've voiced a lot of concerns and reservations and some criticisms of some things going on in crypto. And of course, you immediately get branded as, you're a Neanderthal, you're from the Stone Age, what's wrong with you, baby boomers, you don't get it, et cetera. And the fact is, I've been studying this for years. I've read the technical papers. I do keep up with it. I've been involved in, I worked with the U.S. military in interdicting the use of cryptocurrencies by ISIS. I've actually seen ways that this stuff can be interdicted. I can't really discuss them in any detail. Some of this information is classified, but the point is there's just more there than maybe some of the fans want to believe or want to tell themselves. But my point being, I'm not technophobic at all. I like you. I find it fascinating. I try to learn about it, but I'm not a cheerleader either. I don't get the pom-poms out and say, go buy this stuff. And I think for people who do, it's maybe self-interested, because if you own some, you probably want the price to go up.
Sure.
Although I would say that it doesn't have a price. Bitcoin doesn't have a price. It has a cross rate to other forms of money. But that aside, there's a lot of self-interest involved. There's a lot of trolling involved. There are people, I think, who are a little overly enthusiastic and who don't see the dangers in all this. That's why I think it really does pay to be thoughtful.
Agree. At the end of the day, what it comes down to as well is that any cryptocurrency that's going to interface with another currency, if it touches, for example, the US dollar ecosystem, then that's the choke point. Any wire transfer or transfer that's sent in US dollar around the world has to go through an intermediary bank in New York City. Well, that is on
Right.
US soil, and they have complete control of that. So there's a big difference between regulation and enforcement. Ultimately, lawmakers can pass any law they want, but if it can't be enforced, it doesn't really have any teeth. The reason that banks and financial services entities all over the world are complying with extra sovereign regulatory oversight is that and in fact, this oversight compliance is costing them billions of dollars. The reason that they're complying is because the enforcement tools that regulators have at their disposal do have teeth. And anyone who thinks that cryptocurrencies are outside the reach of that, aside from these direct transactions we talked about, are fooling themselves.
Right. And we've talked a little bit, just touched on securities law, counterterrorism, anti-money laundering, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, all the things you mentioned. But there's another kind of 500-pound gorilla in the room, which is our friends at the IRS. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if you go out and buy a Bitcoin for $200. So it wasn't that long ago. I mean, it's shot up so much that it wasn't that long ago you could get one for $200, and today it's worth $2,000. And you use it to buy something, and you don't even have to cash it in for dollars. You just you buy a plane ticket or anything you can buy with Bitcoin. Well, in my example, you just had a $1,800 gain that you have to put on your income tax return. You actually have to put that on your 1040. Bitcoin is some kind of property. I query whether it's a capital asset or not, but it doesn't matter. It could be ordinary income or capital gains. But you have a $200 basis, $2,000 of value or proceeds, and you've got an $800 gain. You have to put it on your tax return and pay the tax. Now, how many Bitcoin users are actually doing that? I don't know the answer, but I'm guessing it's not that many. And all those who are not are tax evaders, at least if you're U.S. citizens. If you're a citizen of a different country, and that may be different, but for U.S. citizens, at least that's got to go on your tax return. Now, so that's the law. If you don't do it, it's intentional, willful, is possibly a felony. This is how they got Al Capone. It wasn't for murder or bootlegging. It was for tax evasion. Now, is there enforcement? I haven't heard of much, but the IRS is a funny organization. They'll see things like this, and they'll kind of lie in wait. They'll sit there and say, well, why chase after a couple little guys? It's all new. Why don't we just wait? Let it build up for years. Let the amounts involved get into the billions, and then go scoop them all up at once. And the way you would do that, of course, you'd need some kind of test case or some probable cause, but you'd serve a subpoena on the major Bitcoin exchanges and demand all their books and records and all the identities of all the counterparties. And they would resist that. They'd go into court, and you could probably get a court order enforcing that. Well, now all of a sudden, as I say, the exchanges are giving up all this information, and the Bitcoin fans say, well, so what? I've got a digital wallet. All they're going to do is get a code that they can't crack, but maybe not. So the point is, you can kind of go from there. You can start to find purchases. You can subpoena the sellers. If it happens to be Amazon, they're not a rogue organization. They're certainly going to comply with the subpoena. On and on and on. I'm not saying this is easy. I'm not saying it's happening tomorrow morning. I'm saying that we've seen this before. One of my favorite cases in law school, I was a tax lawyer, by the way, was they were trying to, the IRS was trying to impute the income of a house of ill repute, a brothel, and the brothel didn't keep any books and records, and the defense was, well, you can't prove how much income we had, so you can't assess us. And the IRS got the laundry bill, and they looked how many times the sheets were cleaned, and figured out the going rate and came up with an income, inferred income, and the judge said that's good enough for me in the absence of anything else. So the IRS does not let the absence of information stop them. They will kind of come up with the worst set of facts for you and put the burden of proof on you to prove otherwise. So they're pretty resourceful in that way. So that's another pitfall, I think, for the young crypto community to bear in mind.
All right, so we have a little bit of time left. There's a couple of other subjects. Let's move into geopolitics and the G20's got a meeting coming up on the 7th and 8th. I believe it's going to be in Hamburg, Germany. There was a recent article that portrayed Germany and China linking up as globalization partners. I'm going to read a quote from a professor of the Chinese School of Journalism and Communication, and he's a fellow for the National Academy of Development and Strategy of Renmin University. And the quote is, in the global context of increasing uncertainty due to the U.S. and Britain's actions of anti-socialization, isolationism, and nationalism, the G20 can forge ahead for a more stable, more sustainable, and more responsible global economy only if the two groups of countries unite. Jim, what's your take on this, and is there anything else happening regarding the G20 that you think it's important to note right now?
Yeah, I do, Alex. And again, as you mentioned, it is coming up July 7th, 8th in Hamburg, Germany. The G20, of course, G for group. So it's a group of 20 nations, although it's actually more like 24. They invite Norway and Spain and a couple other hitters. And they also have some multilateral participants, the IMF and the European Union. So I call it G20 and friends, but they get about 30 or so key players at the table. The leaders meet once a year. They used to meet twice a year, but as we get further away from the crisis, they dialed that down to once a year. But there are G20 meetings throughout the year at levels below the the leadership or the president, if you will. So there's the central banks and finance ministers. They meet a couple of times a year and other technical working groups. So the G20 never sleeps. Their work goes on around the clock, even though these summits, the big ones, only happen once a year. And a lot of people kind of shrug and go, what the heck's the G20? I mean, it seems like a boondoggle. I disagree. And I had a long section in my book, The Death of Money, about the G20, and I made the point that it's really the board of directors of the global economy. If you think of, because of globalization and some of the things we talked about earlier, digitization and so forth, if you think of the highly integrated, connected, densely networked global economy, it has a central bank, which is the IMF, and that has a board of directors, which is the G20. So it's actually a very powerful organization, even though they don't agree on every little thing. So they have a rotating presidency. In this year, it's Germany. That's why the meeting's in Hamburg. Last year, it was China. The meeting was in Guangzhou in September, and the year before that, Turkey, and so forth. So it moves around. And this one is a very important one. So you mentioned China and Germany. So President Xi Jinping of China and Chancellor Angela Merkel of Germany are probably the two leading globalist or pro-globalist figures. Now, they don't have much else in common. I mean, China's communist and Germany's a pretty healthy democracy. But at least they're the two leaders who still espouse traditional globalist view. It's funny, they claim they love free trade, and yet Germany and China have the largest trade surpluses relative to GDP of any major economy. I mean, embarrassingly large. So the point being, they say they like free trade, but they actually like a rigged game that favors their exports, whether it's the cheap euro or the cheap yuan at various points of times. Now we're talking about the currency wars. But anyway, you got these two big globalists, Merkel and Xi, holding hands. But you also have the two greatest nationalists, and the two most powerful nationalists who are Trump and Putin. And I think that's going to be the big story coming out of G20. This was the first face-to-face meeting of Trump and Putin. Of course, you can't, go online or turn on the TV or turn on the radio or pick up a newspaper without hearing Russia, and Russian collusion and Russian interference with the elections and Hillary lost because of Russia and all this other nonsense. So America seems to have a Russia paranoia, Russia fixation going on. But some of that, at least is, in my view, is attributable to the fact that if you're a globalist, you really want to keep Trump and Putin separated. You really want these guys at each other's throats because they are the two most powerful nationalist leaders in the world. And if the two of them ever do set out on a common agenda or strike up a good working relationship, that's going to give a powerful boost to the anti-globalist nationalist forces. So you got the two leading globalists, Xi and Merkel. You got the two leading nationalists, Trump and Putin. They're going to be, meeting on the sidelines. By the way, the G20 has a formal agenda and formal sort of plenary sessions, and they have a class photo and all that stuff. But a lot of the most important action happens on the sidelines in these little bilateral and maybe trilateral meetings where two or three leaders will go off to the side and work on some deals because, these are busy people. It's not like they see each other all the time. So this is a good opportunity for that. You always have a little BRICS mini summit. BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, they have a little mini summit on the sidelines of the G20. They do have their own BRICS summit at a different time of year, but since they're all in the G20 meetings tend to be a good opportunity for a little BRICS summit. The other bilateral relationship I'm watching, they call it mackerel after the fish, but it's Emmanuel Macron and Angela Merkel. So Macron and Merkel, mash them together, you get mackerel. But what's going on there is, of course, despite some early warnings, it looks like Merkel is in pretty good shape for her election. I believe it's September 24th. Looks like she's cruising to re-election as chancellor. And of course, Emmanuel Macron was just elected as the president of France in a very convincing way. So, and he's a lot younger. Their mantra is more Europe. This is I think the friendliest, most productive potentially most important period of Franco-German relations, almost going back to Konrad Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle. So I think you do have to go back to the 50s and early 60s to find greater Franco-German cooperation. That's a big deal because it means that some of the reforms that are needed in the European Union, and Alex, you know from prior podcasts, I'm very bullish on Europe, very bullish on the euro, have been, still am, when a lot of economists, Paul Krugman and others were running around with their hair on fire saying Europe was falling apart. I was the one saying no, they're going to stick together. Greece is not getting kicked out. Spain's not going to quit. The euro is strong and getting stronger. And, of course, all those things have played out exactly along those lines. But that doesn't mean it's all good. There are some problems. They need a unified banking regulation. They're getting that. But above all, they need unified fiscal policy. They've had unified monetary policy since the Maastricht Treaty in 1992 and the rollout of the euro in 1999-2000. But they need unified fiscal policy. Germany has not wanted to backstop that until Merkel saw the kind of fiscal discipline, goes by the name of austerity, but she would call it prudence. She's saying, in effect, Germany's not going to underwrite Greek debt or Spanish debt or Italian debt or Portuguese debt unless we see some evidence that all you countries are getting your house in order in terms of debt to GDP ratios and deficits as a percentage of GDP. That's been happening in a very positive way, and now I think Germany's ready to take the next step. And there's been some talk about a fiscal parliament and common fiscal policy and a Eurozone finance minister and a unified budget. These are all very significant advances. They will solve the problem of the euro once and for all because you'll be combining fiscal monetary policy the same way we do in the United States. And it looks like Macron is in favor of all that, and he'll find a willing partner in Merkel. So I think that's a big deal too. So I'm watching the Trump-Putin relationship. I'm watching China-Germany, which you mentioned. Always keep an eye on the BRICS, and I think mackerel will be another thing well worth watching.
It's going to be interesting to see how this all plays out. We have just a few minutes left, and we have two quick topics we want to hit. So let's move on to Syria. Very briefly, a few days ago, a U.S. Fa-18 Hornet, which is it's a first-tier fighter bomber, it shot down a Syrian Su-22, which had dropped some bombs near the American-backed fighters south of Tabqa, if I'm saying that correctly. The American commanders on site, they indicated that the aircraft was shot down in compliance with their standard ROE, which is rules of engagement, and that they had notified Russian forces prior to engaging the aircraft. And the reason they do that is they want to mitigate any chances of accidental escalation. But afterwards, a statement from the Russian Defense Ministry warned that any aircraft or objects in flight west of the Euphrates, which includes coalition and American aircraft, would be followed by Russian air defense systems as targets. So I reckon the whole situation over there is confusing to most. There's so many forces in play, so many different factions, so many different motivations. I know this is a huge topic, but just in a few minutes, could you talk about what's your view on these events, the players, and possible outcomes here?
Well, obviously this is serious. Somehow we got through the entire Cold War, a time when wasn't Russia at the time, it was the Soviet Union, but think of it as Russia and the United States, armed to the teeth with thermonuclear weapons and intercontinental ballistic missiles, and command and control systems that could have completely destroyed life on the planet. Somehow we got through that with no Russian or American ever firing a shot at each other. Now, sure, there were lots of other wars with allies and proxies and so forth, Vietnam, Angola, Cuba, there were revolutions, assassinations. I'm not saying there wasn't bad stuff going on. There was, but there wasn't a single time when Russians and Americans shot at each other. And that was not by accident. It was because the two sides knew that the first shot could escalate and it could end up destroying the planet, and nobody wanted to go there. I think those lessons are still understood, but this kind of, what you're describing, Alex, is a little scary and a little dangerous. Now, there's good reason to believe that some of this is posturing. Well, shooting down a Syrian jet is not posturing. That's somebody got blown out of the sky on that one. But the Russian complaints, maybe just to kind of hold up their end and show some support for Syria. But this is going to get worse because right now, Russia and the United States have a common enemy, which is ISIS. The Russians support Assad. We support the rebels. We support the Kurds. The Turks want to destroy the Kurds. So a lot of conflicting cross currents here. But the one thing everyone agrees on is to destroy ISIS. Well, what happens when ISIS is actually destroyed? I mean, the threat will never be completely wiped out. They'll just go underground. They'll conduct terror. But in terms of a state, in terms of holding territory, there's not quite mopping up in Mosul, but that's getting close to being done. And then Raqqa's next, and then clean up the Euphrates River Valley. At some point, ISIS won't exist as a state, and then the U.S.-backed rebels and Kurds on the one hand, and the Russian-backed Syrian army on the other are going to be face to face in a battle for Damascus. And so I guess what I would say is this is a really good example. North Korea is another one. Ukraine is another one. But these are all examples of why the Russians and the U.S. should be talking to each other, improving relations, building bridges, opening lines of communication. Yep. And instead, we've got this Washington, D.C. Beltway circus about, Hillary's whining about why she lost the election, which is nonsense. But for some reason, if you talk to the Russians, you're colluding to defeat the Democrats. We should be talking to the Russians every day. I like to say that it's smart to talk to the Russians. It's dumb to lie about talking to the Russians. I don't know why Jared Kushner couldn't fill out his forms correctly. So there's been a lot of amateurish work and kind of inexplicable bad behavior by some Trump administration officials for no good reason, because we should be talking to the Russians. So hopefully we'll get past some of this hysteria, build bridges to Russia, and help to alleviate some of the tensions you're describing.
Yep, very much agree. All right, last item, North Korea. Recently, there were exercises in South Korea of, like, my understanding is over 100 F-16 fighters were involved. Also, F-35s have been deployed. These are U.S. F-35s that have been deployed to South Korea. And also there have been civil defense briefings in Guam, which is where they station a lot of the B-52s for power projection in that theater. Last podcast, you said something to me that really struck me, and that was that you expect the U.S. will be at war with North Korea by 2018. What are your current thoughts on what's going on in North Korea?
There's no change in that assessment. I point out that we went to war with Iraq. We invaded Iraq in 2003, March 2003. We jumped off on the road to Baghdad. But I'll use General Mattis as an example. James Mattis today is Secretary of Defense, but at that time he was the commandant of the 1st Marine Division. And he was told in 2002, get ready, we're going into Iraq. And it was get you guys ready. So the point is, you don't go to war overnight. There's at least a year, perhaps longer, in preparation. Now, just because you start the preparation doesn't mean you pull the trigger. So to me, 2017 looks like 2002 in Iraq. We're going to try sanctions. We're going to try diplomacy. We're going to try to engage with allies. But notwithstanding that, the orders have been passed to get ready. Particularly the Navy and the Strategic Air Command and some other, certainly special operators and others. And so the only question, so we're on the path to war. I expect it in 2018. The only question is what could change it? What could change that outcome? There are really only two things. Number one, Kim Jong-un gives up his nuclear programs and missile programs in a verifiable way. I don't expect to see that happen because he thinks that's essential to his own survival. Mm-hmm. The other one is that somehow Russia and China put enough pressure on North Korea to get them to do that anyway. And Russia, I don't see doing that, partly for the reason we just discussed, which is the U.S. is barely talking to Russia, which is too bad because there are issues of war and peace at stake. And then as far as China is concerned, Trump sent a tweet the other day, and I sent a tweet in response, or I said, this is the most important tweet the president has ever sent. And I'm paraphrasing because I don't have it in front of me, but he said, China, looks like China's not having much success changing North Korean behavior. Too bad, but at least they tried, or worse to that effect. In other words, he wasn't overtly, blatantly criticizing China, but in a pretty clear way, he was saying, okay, I gave you guys a chance. You didn't do anything. Time's up. Now we're going to turn on North Korea ourselves. That's how I read it, and I think that's the right interpretation. So China has not been able to do anything. We're barely talking to Russia. Kim Jong-un will not be deterred. We're not going to risk Los Angeles based on his good intentions, if he ever has any. So the only thing left to do is to go in and take it out. And some people have pointed out that they have a lot of anti-aircraft capability. The significance of Guam is that long before I think fighter attack aircraft and other forces get into theater, and long before the aircraft carriers, the kind of Nimitz class carriers, get within range of North Korean anti-ship missiles, we will have suppressed all that with our long-range bombers, the B-52s and the B-2s. So I think the war will start out of Guam with very heavy bombing before we then come in with the carriers and some of the smaller, more nimble aircraft.
Yeah, unless doctrines changed since I was in the military, that's standard procedure. They'll gain control of the battle space, particularly the airspace first, and then they'll move from there.
Right.
All right, Jim, I appreciate the discussion today. It's been very insightful, like always, and look forward to doing it again next time.
Thank you, Alex.
You have been listening to The Gold Chronicles with Jim Rickards and Alex Stanczyk, presented by Physical Gold Fund. Recordings can be found at physicalgoldfund.com/podcasts. You can register there for news of upcoming interviews with Jim Rickards and other world-class thinkers.